My name is Fiona Hutchins. I am a nurse practitioner. I'm the president of BCNPA. In the room with me, Alex Arndt, who's a staff member of the ARMBC and is helping to coordinate all of these NNPBC webinars. And then we also have Natasha Fombala, who is a previous vice president of BCNPA, but now sits on our BC Coalition of Nursing Associations board and is working with myself and Kathleen Fivey at that board with respect to nurse practitioners' viewpoints towards this proposed amalgamation.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, if you can hear people, that was Natasha and
hello,
Alex. Lovely. And so the way this works is we're going to do a very, hopefully, brief presentation. I'm going to whip through a lot of slides to be able to just give you some background. And tonight's webinar in particular is focused on getting feedback from nurse practitioners about our current terms of agreement that we have constructed towards the plan for potential amalgamation of all four nursing associations. And what will happen is when we get to that point of the discussion, we will have you do those questions and we will read them out and then we will try to answer them as best we can. And if it turns out there are things that we can't answer, we will make note of those so that we can, come to you with an answer in the future. So at this point, it sounds like there are 14 people online. Overall, we had 30 registrants for this. So I'm hopeful that we're going to have a few more people signing on in the next couple of minutes. But we will just move ahead regardless because we have a time frame and we want to be respectful of everybody's time. So I'm just going to go to the next slide. So this slide is really just to remind you all that within the nursing world, there are sort of three pillars that provide us with guidance and advocate for nursing issues. One is the regulatory college, which essentially is a public protector. And as you may or may not know, that college has now previously been the CRMBC, but now is now amalgamated into one regulatory body, which includes regulators for the licensed practical nurses and also for the registered psychiatric nurses. And so essentially all four, if you want to count, designations, NPs, RNs, RPNs, and LPNs are under this one nursing college in terms of regulation. The middle ball that you see there is the professional association, and that is essentially where we sit. And within all of the designations, at this point, each designation has had its own professional association. In the case of nurse practitioners, we actually fit into sort of two hats under that. If you've become a member of BCNPA, then you're within the BCNPA association, but the ARMBC association also, by virtue of fee agreement with the college, have nurse practitioners as members of their association, and essentially all nurse practitioners in BC are members of the ARMBC. And then, of course, there's LPN association and RPN association. And then, of course, there's the union, which is an important pillar for those who are in unionized positions, but that does not apply to MPs and legislatively will not be applying to MPs in the future. We can move on. The next slide is, it's okay, the next slide is essentially about a bit about the history, just to give you some context of where we've been. And essentially, back in 2013, as many of you may know, BCNPA was brought together in the early 2000s, probably 2006. They were in existence, and that has always been a voluntary organization. And in 2013, it became quite clear to us that although we had some piecemeal attempts by government to address some of our issues in terms of integration, there really was a lack of planning overall about how to integrate MPs in the province, and there was an overall absence of the nursing voice in healthcare in the province, and a lack of a nursing strategy overall for BC. So in that context, the BCNPA and the NNPBC came together to work toward talking about the issues that they shared in common, and just to quickly go over that, since 2013, our BCNPA organization has been working together with the ARNBC to talk about how do we get our messages out, how can we support nurse practitioners as a collective, being that we all come from a nursing voice. In 2014, there were a number of milestones reached. I'm not going to belabor those. In 2015, this group came to be known as the BC Coalition of Nursing Associations, and has been that group ever since then. And that included, at that point, the Association of LPNs and the Association of RPNs, as well as nurse practitioners and RNs. And so over that time frame, in 2015, 2016, there was a lot of work done around policy and engaging with stakeholders and engaging with the government and having some input into what's going on overall in the health view for the province. In 2017, around our coalition table, we started to talk about the fact that we realized that there's a lot of synergies among our associations. We started to discuss the benefits of potentially amalgamating into one association. We continued to build on the trust that we have between all of our associations, and we recognize that we are stronger as a unified voice, especially when it comes to trying to have the nursing voice at key stakeholder tables and at the government. And so on the flip side of that, the government themselves have been very keen to see the nursing voice unified in terms of professional practice. As well, other stakeholders have voiced that, and so that's part of our evolution last year. Next slide. We have recognized as a collective group that all of us as individual associations are more sustainable if we are able to have some sustainable funding and a fee collection agreement with the college, which is now the One College. And we have been able to demonstrate over these 5 years now, that we can work collaboratively with the principle of equity and the respect for one another's associations and the respect for that collaboration. And we've also recognized that what we're doing is groundbreaking in a time where across the country nursing factions are splintering off, where maybe around the world they don't have much unity of nursing groups, and we're within our own province, frankly, there has been significant splintering between the union and the RN Association. We have been a model and a beacon in terms of unity, and we are seeing this as a very groundbreaking initiative, and that is being held up around the country and across the world as such. And so we started to conceive of what would this look like if we amalgamated into one association. And so in terms of BCNPA specifically, and many of you on the line may be members of BCNPA, but some of you may not be, but from the BCNPA perspective, you know, for us, this vision of amalgamation affects us in several ways. One is in terms of sustainability. As you may all know, we are a completely volunteer-run association. Every one of us who work in this association do so off the side of our desk with, you know, many hours put in and a very limited budget that comes from our membership fees that we collect. So it is very tough to make that a sustainable thing, especially when we grow every year in terms of numbers of nurse practitioners. And there are more and more stakeholder tables that we're being asked to attend. There's more and more places in the government where we can have an effect on what happens for healthcare in this province and what happens for nurse practitioners. And so a voluntary organization is sustainable for a while, but not in the long run. There are also a number of efficiencies that we could have gained through an amalgamation. There's the strength that we gain in numbers and having a unified nursing voice in terms of political influence. That's a huge impact in terms of government attention, and the government has been very clear that they want to see this kind of collective collaboration. And at this point, given that the colleges have all merged into one, we see that as a really good opportunity to do the same and to advocate for a single fee collection agreement. So that brings us up to today. And what we're talking about today is this concept, this proposal for the nurses and nursing practitioners of BC. And just to give you a little summary of our work to date around this concept, back in May of 2017, we brought together all the boards of all of the associations to have a forum to talk about this, to hear from those board members about how we thought we should move forward and what key principles would be important to guide us and so on. We have a steering committee that meets every 2 weeks and includes one member from each of the associations as well as the staff. We've had advice from a number of experts, which are listed there, including legal advice, and we have ongoing discussions and negotiations regularly around the coalition table to try to come up with the framework for which to move this forward. And to date, we've come up with an agreement on the name, which is the Nurses and Nurse Practitioners of BC. We've come up to a proposed governance structure that has been agreed upon, and we've got an initial working draft for integration. Slide. And we also subsequently have had a BC Nurse Practitioner Town Hall in November to present some of this information. There have been numerous webinars such as this offered both, well, through the NNPBC website to all designations, but also we as BCNPA have attended nurse practitioner COPs or department meetings to be able to provide updates to everyone on where we're at. We had incorporated the feedback that we've heard from nurse practitioners to date, and we're bringing that to the BCNA table as we work through the documents. And as mentioned, we do have some agreement around the table at this point, not only on the name and the governance structure, but we have now drafted bylaws and terms of reference for the councils, and we are looking at those at BCNPA from the point of view of what's best for our members, you know, due diligence around the legal aspects and so on. And that brings us to tonight's meeting. Just as a bit of background for you, these are the key things that are guiding principles. They are on the NNPBC website, and you can look at them at any time, but I think it's important to note that key among them is the focus on equality and inclusiveness that we feel as a collective will lead to success. We want to respect the autonomy of all the designations, but also recognize that some change is inevitable, but we also want for this process to be a catalyst for change. And within our designations, we can really take charge of how we want to see the nursing profession overall in the future. We value innovation. We want to be strategic, right? And we recognize and preserve within our guiding principles the uniqueness of each association. We want to engage with members and ultimately have a strong, respected leadership focus and be the professional voice for all of the BC nursing professions. So this is our governance model. You may have seen it before. Essentially, we have the concept of having a overarching nurses and nurse practitioner board, which will be, for lack of a better word, the operational arm of the association, and appointed to that board and elected to that board will be members from each of the nursing councils and separate members in terms of an Indigenous nursing representative, a student representative, a public representative, and a representative from the NNPBC, which is basically the educators of BC. Each of the councils will have 2 representatives, and each council will be elected. So we'll move on to the next slide, which is to say, essentially, our existing boards, if this moves ahead, our existing boards will become the first councils of this NNPBC board or NNPBC association. And from within each of those councils, there will be 2 people appointed to sit on the board. The councils will continue to be elected. So much like our BCNPA elections occur, a council, an MP council will be elected by MP members. The RN council will be elected by RN members, and so on and so on. And at this point in time, the council will be comprised of the exact same designations we currently have on our board. Ultimately, the council elected positions will be determined by the council, but we will add 1 Indigenous rep to each of the councils because we feel that is a very salient and key area in which we need to focus some attention and support. During the transition period, should this amalgamation go ahead, we would the boards currently would roll over into the councils, and our election timing for people going off those councils would be the same as it is currently, and we would ultimately have elections for all of the councils in a spring term. Essentially, each of the councils would have an operating budget, and the details of all of that have yet to be identified, but essentially the overarching budget would sit with the overall association to be able to do the work that needs to be done on a daily basis for all of the associations, and each of the councils would have a small budget to be able to do their team meeting, their council meetings, and their whatever aspects they have that are relevant to them. We would also be able to, at some point, request further funding for special projects if that was the case. Go ahead, Natasha.
So it's Natasha. So from my perspective, that's the big win for us as DCMPA. I really think after working at this for a decade, and I think we've done a fairly good job, that we really are going to be able to turn our attention to the things that are really things that need to be advocated for NPs, because we're going to have this core council, this core board of the NNPBC with staff with functioning staff. So things like the website and secretary and taking minutes and booking rooms and doing all of the things, running the committees and doing all the things in terms of reference.
And booking meetings and so on and so on.
Strat planning, all of that stuff. We don't have to do anymore. We can actually look at, can we do a media campaign? We need role clarity. We need to engage the public more. We've been talking about that for years, and we just haven't had the money, haven't had the resources to be able to do that. So for me, that's really the exciting piece of this kind of amalgamation.
Yeah, so those are all really important points, Natasha, and for those on the line who don't necessarily perhaps have an understanding of the workload that goes into this, you know, we have an unbelievably successful association off the backs of purely volunteer work, but that is not, as I said, sustainable, and there is a huge amount of time and energy that goes into those details that could be better handled by a staff, and we could really ramp up our ability to speak to NP issues, connect with government, connect with stakeholders that we need to move things ahead. So I think those are really good points. Moving on to the next slide. What about the fees for this organization? Well, a lot of that has yet to be determined. Ultimately, we would hope that if this comes to fruition, we would then be able to negotiate a fee agreement with the CRMBC, which is something that has occurred in the past. As you may recall, the CRMBC was once the RNABC, which included a professional practice wing, and as such, there has always been a component of that entity that values professional practice, but of course, as a CRMBC, that is not their role. Their role is to protect the public, and really that association piece has to be carved off. And so there is potentially a means to collect a fee through the now one nursing regulator that will be looking after all of the designations. And so we have yet to see exactly what will happen with fees. There are some other options, should that not occur, around how we might be able to collect fees on a voluntary basis from members, especially in terms of considering whether or not we may be able to provide some insurance, but a lot of those details have yet to be worked out. So that brings us to today, which is really what this webinar is hopefully geared towards, and we really want to spend the bulk of time hearing from you, and I'm sorry this took so long. The next slide, you're going to see our guiding goals and responsibilities for our terms of reference as an MP Council. And essentially our terms of reference as an MP Council is what's going to guide us as a council in what we do, what voice we have, and what we do with respect to engaging with the bigger nurses and nurse practitioner board. So we need to hear from you about what you think are really the salient things that need to be incorporated in that terms of agreement so that we can get it right. So with that, I'll move on to the slide. I'll run through these quickly, and then we just want to open it up to you guys for questions. So one of our key deliverables is to define, discuss, and make recommendations to the NNPBC board on MP-specific issues and projects. Our second goal, deliverable, and responsibility is to focus on guiding MP-specific initiatives that are not undertaken by the board or the organization overall. The third thing is to appoint a spokesperson from within our council to speak on behalf of MPs to major stakeholders. And the key with this is that we want to ensure nurse practitioners are speaking on behalf of nurse practitioners. Further to that, we would also recognize that, you know, in the day-to-day running of an organization, it may not always be possible for a nurse practitioner to get away, to be able to speak to media or the public or a random stakeholder. And so we want to work with the staff toward that end. But our vision is that our key stakeholders, i.e. the Ministry of Health, we would still want to be able to be the voice that speaks there. We want to develop priorities to guide our overall NNPBC strategic plan, and of course work with the staff to deliver that. We want to collaborate with the other councils on NNPBC. We want to work with the board to develop mechanisms to resolve disputes, because obviously we have our guiding principles, which are that we all have an equal voice and that we respect each other and that we work together collaboratively. But we do anticipate there may come to be some issues where the voices are opposite in their thought process. And so we need to work as a collective to decide how are we going to resolve those disputes. We want to advocate for systemic changes to serve the nursing profession overall and NP profession specifically. And some of the particular issues that at BCNPA we work on and that we would envision continuing to work on as part of the NP Council are essentially NP integration into the healthcare system and remuneration issues, which, you know, have been a key issue for our members for a number of years. We want to be able to help create nursing leadership opportunities and also to approve, vet, etc., any policies or communications or papers that the overall NNPBC develops with respect to nurse practitioners. We want to engage nurse practitioner members to encourage their volunteer involvement in the NP Council and on NP-specific initiatives, as well as the broader policy tables that exist. We want to enhance the collaboration between all the nursing designations. We want to also plan, direct, and implement our nurse practitioner conference, and we would do so with the assistance of the NNPBC staff, which is very beneficial to us. And we would anticipate continuing that conference on as we have been all these years. And then ultimately, we want to support and execute the decisions and recommendations of the NNPBC board. So those are our goals and our deliverables and responsibilities that sit within our TOR currently based on the BCNPA conversations we've had and among our executive and board, and our work in a collaborative sense with all of the other NNPBC amalgamation team members. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and we want to hear questions now. I will just put it out there that these are recorded sessions, and so if you are speaking with your NP colleagues in the next little while and they said, oh, I couldn't get on, or I had some technical problem, or I just didn't have time, then we will, I would ask that you refer them to go to the nnpbc.com site and click on this webinar from this date, and they'll be able to hear everything that we talked about and that we responded to. So the first question that came in is, can you please comment on what is going on with BCNU and ARNBC and how that will affect the NNPBC moving forward? And I'm laughing, and Danny's writing, don't laugh, don't laugh. Okay, I have to be politically correct, don't I?
You do.
essentially, for those who don't know, the BCNU has launched a number of lawsuits against the the ARMBC, and that's been an ongoing issue for a number of years now. Further to that, at this point, they have now started a campaign where they are trying to collect a number of signatures. 3,000 is the number, magic number, and if they are able to collect that number of signatures, they'll be able to call an EGM, and essentially the essence of what they want to do at that EGM is to say, our membership in the ARMBC will now cost us $1 rather than the amount that comes off of the single fee agreement that the ARMBC has with the ARMBC. That essentially will annihilate the ARMBC, for lack of a better word. And frankly, I will be politically correct. I'm not going to say any bad words, but I have to just tell you, I think the actions of the union are really appalling, unprofessional. This is my personal opinion, so nobody can sue NNPBC or any of the ARMBC or BCNPA about this. If they want to sue me, they can. But the bottom line is they are being very unprofessional, and they are causing a huge amount of strife in the nursing community at a time where nursing really should be coming together and actually making inroads to make impacts for the health care of all of British Columbians. So honestly, their actions are abysmal. It's a moving target every day. Every day, we at the DCMPA and those people at the ARMBC and the other members around the coalition table have to scramble to deal with what's coming next and to deal with all of these issues. So what I can tell you is at this point, we are moving ahead with our amalgamation proposal. We are working at the coalition board to try to figure out the best way forward and to make sure the nurse practitioner voice is heard and part of this process. And ultimately, whatever happens with the union happens, and we will not have control over that. And so there are a lot of unknowns at this point. But we will endeavor to keep our membership up to date as much as possible, and I think Natasha has something to say.
So I guess I would just say that we do have our BCNPA has hired their own lawyer to make sure that we are protected in the existing lawsuits. Now, will the new NNPBC be fully protected? We're not exactly sure how we can do that, but ARNBC has a bunch of lawyers and has learned many things from these existing lawsuits. And as we build these new bylaws for the new entity, we are very conscious of those, and we are doing our best. Now, that being said, I don't think we can say that, are we never going to get sued? We don't know what the future is going to look like. One could hope that we all understand the 3 pillars that are required and that we can all work professionally together nicely and have all of our areas that we're advocating for. But so far, it doesn't seem that we're able to do that. So I think we just need to keep on the plan and take the high road if we can, and keep advocating and sticking to our professional message about how great nursing is and how much we care for our patients, and that we should be leaders and have a great voice in that kind of advocacy work.
And I'm just going to throw in, I guess I would say to all of you on the line, and to all of you who can then spread it to your colleagues, both nurse practitioner colleagues and nursing colleagues, we need people who value nursing and the professional voice to step up. We need nurses, RNs, and nurse practitioners to come out in support of the ARNBC at their EGMs that they will be having in the near future, and standing up to, honestly, what amounts to complete bullying by the union. And we need your voice to be there to advocate for this. That is the way that the union will not succeed, is if people rise up from the masses and say, you know what, the nursing profession is better than this, and we are going to make a difference. So I would just say to all of you online, and if you can spread it to your colleagues, please get your nursing colleagues out to these things. Please get people involved. Please become involved yourself, because that's how this is going to be successful. The next question is from Kelly McInerney. How will MPs guarantee an MP voice in the bigger organization? So to answer that, that's what these terms of reference are about. This is all about our voice, and for each nursing designation, the terms of reference are about our voice and how we exert that voice at the larger organization level. I'm going to hand it over to Natasha about how to secure funds for MPs.
So, no, I wasn't looking at that question. I just wanted to answer Kelly's question about protection from the union. So it's above, right? Yeah. Yeah. If you could just go above.
Okay.
It's this one. Recourse. No, if you go further above. We didn't answer that one. Anyway, so it is legislated that MPs cannot be part of the union, so that's not an issue for us. So actually, I feel that in a lot of this kind of messiness that's going on, that, like Fiona said, we can really be lead professionals in this because we aren't affected by the union, and we can come out strong and we can say what we want. So there's not a lot of, when David Byers did his report and went around and talked to nurses, he actually explicitly says in his report that a lot of nurses didn't even want to speak to him about the issues because they were afraid
of their union
and being bullied. And that's a big issue for me. And I think as nurse practitioners, we are protected from that, so we have a voice. And I think we should be using that. But in terms of kind of the union kind of infiltrating us as nurse practitioners, there's really no, and we will put that in our council terms of reference as well, in terms of us having a bit of a unique voice in that because we don't belong to the union, and also a unique voice in negotiating in terms of salary. Because we don't belong to a union, we as an association, we need to be a bit more of an advocacy role for that with HEABC and a bunch of the other stakeholders. So we will continue that work, and we wanted to make sure that that was explicitly stated in our terms of reference for our council.
And it is in the current terms of reference, the remuneration aspect. Lisa Dawson has asked, is there any recourse to what the union is doing? And I would just reiterate what I've said. Stand up. Get your colleagues to stand up, be united, be a professional voice, and that will be the recourse. And then Kelly asked, now Kelly's got another question. Once we are part of NNPBC, how do we ensure move forward and that RN power doesn't become a priority because of the size?
Because of equity. So the board, and I think this was a coup for us because there's only 400 of us and there's 50,000 RNs. So in fairness, RNBC has had to do a bit more, kind of advocacy around the NNPBC because of that, because the RNs are like 50,000 of us. Why did, the NPs and the LPNs, there's a bit of this, everyone's worried about losing their voice. So I think we've been able to assure everybody that an equal representation of all of the 4 designations is the way to go, and that is how we will ensure, there'll be 2 NPs on the board and there'll be 2 RNs on the board.
And we all have equal representation. And I can tell you, having worked with this BC coalition table over the last 2 years, essentially that has been the principle that has reigned. We have been able to come to consensus among our various designations about everything, ultimately. There has never been, in the last few years that I've been involved, a time where one group says, no, we're not doing that, and stamping their feet. Yeah, do we have some disagreements at times? Yes, but we hash those out, and we are able to come to a consensus. And that is because of our guiding principles and because we've said everyone here has an equal voice, and we are working for the betterment of the nursing profession overall. And yes, each of the designations have their own nursing designation interests at heart, and we will, of course, going forward, continue to represent those, and that's what our terms of agreement are about. But we will, but ultimately, I think because we've got those principles in place, we have a really solid foundation on which to build. And I just want to not miss Kelly's question about NP funding, because of course, I will just say, and obviously Natasha's here with her hat of being on the BCCNA Council, not her hat of being a ministry person. But I will just say, from my point of view, that nurse practitioner funding issues are a key issue, are a key problem. We have at BCNPA submitted our funding papers on primary care and on specialized care to the government. The government, through the Secretariat and David Byers, are working to ensure that we really integrate the nursing voice throughout the primary care landscape through this province. And there is much work happening in the background. I don't have anything specific I can tell you, but I am very optimistic that that work is going on. And we, as an MP Council of the NNPBC, or as BCNPA, will continue to advocate for that work to be going on.
And I can tell you the work is going on. David and I are working very hard on the strategy to get some kind of funding model accepted. Again, no timelines, no definitives, but I think I'm hopeful as well. But I'm learning. I'm new in the ministry, but I'm very hopeful as well.
So the next question comes from Michelle Sims. The NNPBC proposal sounds like it is moving forward from what I'm hearing from colleagues. This is an exciting evolution, and MPs approve. Oh, that's great to hear. Is there a chance that this proposal will not move forward, and what will happen if that's the case? Okay, so yeah, nothing is in stone, right? I mean, we've got 4 associations that need to all be in agreement, whose members need to all be in agreement that this is a good idea to move forward. And so what we've been advocating for is, yes, this is a good idea to move forward. And we've tried to outlay the reasons why that is so. Each of the associations are also doing the same. Now, I can tell you my gut feeling is the LPN Association and the RPN Association, I think, will generally be quite supportive. That's my gut feeling. The ARMBC, it's layered in multiple complexities, not the least of which is all the crazy union stuff, which is calculated to destroy the ARMBC. So if that happens, we don't have control over that. And if this amalgamation doesn't go through, then it doesn't go through. I mean, that's the bottom line. We continue to be the BCNPA. But ultimately, if we vote to amalgamate and it doesn't go through via the other entities, then it doesn't go through. And we continue on as we have been.
And we will be having a vote too, right? This isn't a sure thing.
No. We will have a vote, of course.
Our members, so keep your eyes posted for that.
And on that note, we had recently sent out a save the date of March 8th because we were hoping we could have a special general meeting at that time to have a vote on this. But for a number of reasons beyond our control, that is not going to happen. So I have just let our board members know that tonight, and you will all BCMPA members will be getting an email in the next day or two with that information, and we will have to look at another date at which we can move forward. But yeah, every day is a new adventure. So yeah, that's all I'll say about that. Nikita? Hi, Nikita. What are the current options, ideas in regard to the current future MP integration and remuneration? So I would suggest that you take a look at on our BCNPA website at the two documents that we wrote recently. One is a primary care transformation document, and the other is more specialized focus, nurse practitioner practice, but focusing on the fact that specialized care occurs across a continuum and is not necessarily just an acute focus. Those two documents have been submitted to the government. I know that the government is looking closely at the primary care transformation document. Those two documents outline how we can better integrate NPs into practice throughout the province and also address remuneration issues. Further to the question of remuneration, we have at BCNPA been working toward having discussions about that overarching issue for a long time, and have actually just in the last few months met with HEABC, who are the people who that sits with, to have some discussions about this. So we've opened discussions with them. We are having another meeting with them in March. We continue to advocate for things that make sense for nurse practitioners, to, for lack of a better capsule to put that in. So those things will continue whether or not this amalgamation happens or not. I mean, the work that we do as DCMPA every day on this will continue. And if we become amalgamated, it will continue under the MP Council. So in my mind, there really is no difference. The difference is only that we will have more capacity to engage on those issues that we really want to around moving MPs forward when we don't have to answer 500 emails a day. Are they still okay with NNPBC
just referring to the RN.
as a... Yeah, I think, you know, there was a little bit of consternation about that initially, and we did hear at our coalition table about that. I think ultimately it's a thing where people see the name and they go, wait now, how come we're not included, and without really thinking things through. And I have made the point all along, and the team that is working to spread the word on this have made this point, that, you know, as nurse practitioners, we are unknown entities in this province, still 12 years later. The public generally do not know who we are. Every day an MP walks in an office and has to explain who they are, what that role is, what that means to their interaction with the patient. And the nurses around the coalition table, LPNs, RPNs, RNs, when I expressed that, got that sentiment. And then that is why we fully engaged in calling this the nurses and nurse practitioners of BC, because the name nurse practitioner needs to be in the vocabulary of people in this province. And so around our board here at the BCCNA, we have come to complete agreement about that. We are moving forward with the name. There's no plan to change the name. There is still occasionally the name brought up by the other groups, mainly by our RNs. And I think some of that goes to also the whole issue between CNSs and nurse practitioners, you know, because CNS is not a designated title, and they wouldn't necessarily just, not say just, but they wouldn't necessarily call themselves a nurse. When a person walks into a room and says, I'm a nurse, whether you're a psych nurse or an LPN or an RN, generally the patient knows what you're going to do. Of course, the patient doesn't know what a CNS is going to do. That's true. But a CNS is not tasked with having a very direct clinical role with the patient. And so given that we have a clinical role with patients, it is important for patients to understand what a nurse practitioner is. So we continue to put that forward, to have that as our mantra, and we have been supported fully by the coalition group. And generally, once nurses, RNs hear the reasons why, my understanding is that they generally become very accepting of that. And so I don't really see that as a major issue. Our questions have run out. Are there other questions? I really want to hear from you guys. are there other things that you think need to be in these goals and deliverables? And I would leave it with you, because we're running out of time, that if you think there are, first of all, you can go back in here and look at this, right, Alex? Yep. So you can go back in here and look at this at a later date, look at this slide on those, and come up with your own thoughts about whether or not there's something drastically missing from this list. Email it to us, info@NNPBC. That would be the best way to do it. Honestly, we really want to hear from you. Go to the nnpbc.com site. You can email your questions to info@nnpbc.com. We want to hear from you on the survey on that site. We are probably going to be sending that survey out independently to our members, because we really want to hear from our members about this. And that's where we're at.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks. Everybody's saying thanks, and we appreciate it. Take care. Have a good night.